You're trash.
George Morris thought firing someone was power, until the woman he called trash revealed she owned 67% of his company. For 5 months, Aria Smith scrubbed toilets, endured his insults, and watched him steal credit from terrified employees who couldn't fight back. But she wasn't just any janitor. She was a billionaire heiress playing the longest game of corporate chess Manhattan had ever seen. Now the board meeting is starting. George has no idea what's coming, and the security footage Aria compiled? It's about to end his career in the most brutal way possible. The crystal chandeliers of Smith's Land and Company cast dancing shadows across the Manhattan conference hall that cold December evening, but George Morris didn't notice the darkness gathering around him. In exactly 47 minutes, the man celebrating his promotion and engagement would learn the most devastating lesson of his career. The woman he called trash was the one person who could destroy him with a single signature. But first, he had a party to enjoy. Inside the top-floor conference hall, warmth filled the air. George Morris, a man in his late 30s, stood at the center of the room in his tailored charcoal suit and crimson tie, a crystal champagne flute in hand, soaking in the applause and congratulations from colleagues and executives. His diamond cufflinks caught the light as he raised his glass. His leather shoes gleamed. His smile was confident, practiced, perfect. Tonight was meant to be the pinnacle of everything he'd worked for. After years of climbing the corporate ladder, he'd finally reached the top, senior vice president of Smith's Land and Company, one of the most prestigious corporations in America. Everyone said this promotion would make him one of the most powerful executives in Manhattan. But George had no idea that just one word, one cruel, careless word, would unravel everything he'd built. The room buzzed with celebration. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cologne, and roasted turkey from the catering tables. A massive Christmas tree stood in the corner, its branches heavy with red and gold ornaments, twinkling lights creating a warm, festive glow. To George Morris, someone shouted from the crowd, raising a glass. To the future of Smith's Land, another voice chimed in. George's fiancée, Janet Howard, clung to his arm, her diamond engagement ring, 3 carats, princess cut, catching the chandelier light with every gesture. She was stunning in her designer red dress, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves, her smile bright and practiced. But her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room like a hawk, always watching, always comparing, always measuring her position against everyone else's. "You did it, darling," Janet whispered in his ear, her voice sweet as honey. "Everything we dreamed of." George squeezed her hand. "We did it together, babe." Across the room, his colleague Marcus Chen approached with a grin, champagne in hand. "George, my man. Senior VP at 38? That's incredible. Your father would be proud." George's smile tightened slightly at the mention of his father, but he recovered quickly. "Thanks, Marcus. It's been a long road, but worth every step." Janet laughed, that practiced social laugh she perfected over years of charity galas and country club events. "George has been working 70-hour weeks. He deserves this." "Absolutely," Marcus agreed, then lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I heard the board is considering you for CEO when Farrows retires next year." George's eyes lit up. "CEO. The ultimate prize." "Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said modestly, though his chest swelled with pride. As Marcus walked away, Janet leaned closer. "CEO, George. Can you imagine? We'll be unstoppable." "One step at a time," George replied, but his mind was already racing ahead, imagining the corner office, the board meetings, the power. But while the party sparkled and celebrated upstairs, something else was happening in the shadows. In the far corner of the hall, near the service entrance behind the dessert table, a woman in a simple blue janitorial uniform quietly pushed a cleaning cart through the crowd. Her name was Aria Smith, though no one at the party knew that name. To them, if they noticed her at all, she was just the cleaning lady. Aria wore yellow rubber gloves and carried a spray bottle and cloth. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat, practical ponytail. Her face, though naturally beautiful, was deliberately plain tonight. No makeup, no jewelry, no effort whatsoever to stand out. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible to the laughter and clinking glasses around her, stepping aside when executives passed, apologizing quietly when anyone came near her cart. No one looked at her. No one thanked her when she emptied their trash. No one noticed the way her eyes, sharp, intelligent, observant, took in every detail of the room. But Aria Smith noticed everything. She noticed the way George Morris dismissed the waitstaff without a word of thanks. She noticed the way Janet Howard looked down at anyone she considered beneath her social class. She noticed the fake smiles, the office politics being discussed in hushed corners, the junior employees desperately trying to impress their superiors. For 5 months, Aria had watched this company from the inside. 5 long months of scrubbing toilets, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and listening. She'd seen things that would shock these executives celebrating in their expensive suits and designer dresses. And she'd seen George Morris for exactly who he was. The party was in full swing, music playing softly in the background, conversations flowing, champagne being refilled by attentive waiters, when Aria quietly made her way toward the dessert table to empty the small trash bins guests had been using for cocktail napkins and discarded hors d'oeuvres plates. She kept her head down, moving quickly and efficiently, trying not to disturb anyone. But as she bent down to pick up a champagne bottle someone had carelessly set on the floor near the dessert table, her shoulder accidentally brushed against a woman's leg. It was Janet Howard. Janet whirled around, her face twisting in disgust. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her voice loud enough to cut through the music and conversations. Several heads turned. Aria straightened up immediately, her heart pounding. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said softly, keeping her eyes lowered. "It was an accident." "An accident?" Janet repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. She looked Aria up and down slowly, deliberately, her lip curling in distaste. "Do you even know how much these shoes cost?" She lifted one foot slightly, showing off her red-bottom Louboutins. "Probably more than you make in a year." Aria clenched her jaw but said nothing. Her hands tightened around the handle of her cleaning cart. George, noticing the commotion across the room, walked over with a smirk, champagne glass still in hand. Several executives followed, curious about the disruption. "What's going on here, babe?" George asked, sliding his arm around Janet's waist. Janet gestured dramatically toward Aria, as if she were pointing out a stain on the carpet. "This cleaner just bumped into me. She nearly ruined my dress and scuffed my shoe." George glanced at Aria briefly, his expression cold and dismissive, as if she were a piece of furniture that had been placed incorrectly. Then he turned to the growing crowd of onlookers, raising his voice for effect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his tone mocking, "this is what happens when you hire people who don't belong in places like this." Nervous laughter rippled through some of the crowd. Others shifted uncomfortably, looking away. Aria's face burned with humiliation, but she kept her composure, her expression carefully neutral. George took a step closer, his eyes hard and cruel. The champagne had loosened his tongue, made him bolder, meaner. He wanted to impress Janet, wanted to show everyone that he was in control, that he was above people like this janitor. "You know what you are," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You're trash. Just like the garbage you pick up every day." The room went silent. A few people gasped softly. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. One junior executive started to step forward, but his colleague grabbed his arm and shook his head. "Don't get involved." Janet laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the silent room. "Exactly. Trash." A few of Janet's friends joined in with nervous giggles, trying to please her. Aria stood frozen, her hands trembling inside her yellow rubber gloves. Every fiber of her being wanted to speak, to defend herself, to reveal who she really was and watch George Morris's smug face crumble into horror. But something stopped her. Not yet, she thought. Not like this. Instead, she lowered her eyes and said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir." George waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his guests. "Just get out of here. You're ruining the mood." Aria nodded once, picked up her cleaning cart with dignity, and walked toward the exit. Her head was held high despite the whispers following her. Despite the stares. Despite the cruelty. But as she reached the door, she paused. She looked back over her shoulder. George and Janet were already laughing again, clinking glasses with their friends, basking in their cruelty as if nothing had happened. As if they'd just crushed an insect and moved on with their evening. Aria's jaw tightened. Her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that everyone ignored, locked onto George Morris for one long moment. Then she whispered to herself, so softly that no one could hear over the music and laughter. "Enjoy your party, Mr. Morris. Because tomorrow, everything changes." That night, alone in her modest studio apartment in Queens, a deliberate choice to stay in character, Aria sat at her small desk and stared at the papers spread before her. Legal documents. Shareholder agreements. Her father's will. The words George Morris had spoken echoed in her mind, "You're trash." She'd been patient for 5 months. She'd endured insults, mistreatment, and invisibility. She'd told herself it was for a greater purpose, to understand the company, to learn who deserved to stay and who needed to go. But tonight, George Morris had crossed a line. And now, Aria Smith was done waiting. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a single contact, David Farrow's, ESQ. Her finger hovered over the call button for just a moment. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. No more hiding. No more observing from the shadows. 7 months early, but some things were more important than following her father's timeline to the letter. Aria pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. David Farrow's speaking. "David," Aria said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end. She could almost hear his surprise. "Aria? Are you certain? You still have 7 months remaining on your father's condition." "I'm certain," she replied firmly. "Schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. 9 a.m. sharp. I'm taking my seat." Another pause, longer this time. David Farrows had been her father's attorney for over 20 years. He'd known Aria since she was a child. He understood what this decision meant. "May I ask what happened?" he asked carefully. Aria's jaw tightened as she remembered George's voice echoing through the conference hall. "You're trash." "Someone reminded me why my father created this test in the first place," she said quietly. "To identify exactly who doesn't belong in leadership positions at Smithsland and Company." "I see." David's tone shifted, becoming more businesslike. "All right. I'll send out the board notifications tonight. Emergency session, confidential agenda. Who specifically needs to be in that room?" "The full board," Aria said. "And make absolutely certain that George Morris is present. I want him to see my face when I take everything away from him." "Understood." She heard papers rustling in the background. "And what about Ms. Janet Howard? I understand she was at the party tonight as well." Aria's smile was cold. "Her too. I want them both there to witness what happens when you treat people like they're invisible." "Consider it done," David replied. "Aria, there's something else we need to discuss before Monday. Something about your father's will that I haven't told you yet." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a second clause," David said carefully. "A contingency your father added specifically for situations like this. If you reveal yourself before the year is up, you forfeit half the inheritance to charity." Aria's heart sank. Half. That was billions of dollars. However, David continued, there's an exception. If you reveal yourself to prevent injustice, to protect the company's values, or to remove individuals who threaten Smithsland's integrity, you retain the full inheritance. Your father wrote, true leadership means knowing when to act, even if the timing isn't perfect. Aria exhaled slowly. Her father had anticipated this. He'd known that someone might push her too far, that she might need to act before the year was complete. And he'd made sure she wouldn't be punished for doing what was right. He really thought of everything, didn't he? She whispered. Jonathan Smith always did, David replied warmly. He was testing your judgment, Aria. Not just your patience. And tonight, you chose justice over convenience. That's exactly what he hoped you would do. Tears pricked at Aria's eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, David. I'll see you Monday morning. One more thing, he added. You should know, I'm not your only ally in this. There's someone else who's been watching, documenting everything. Who? Marcus Williams. Head of night security. Your father told him about your identity before he died, asked him to keep an eye on you. Marcus has been compiling evidence for months, security footage, audio recordings, incident reports. Everything George Morris has done since you started working there. Aria's breath caught. Marcus. The quiet security guard who always nodded respectfully when he saw her cleaning late at night, who sometimes left coffee by her cart with a simple note, stay strong. She'd thought he was just being kind. But he'd known all along. Marcus will be at the meeting Monday, David continued. With everything we need to ensure George Morris never works in corporate America again. After hanging up, Aria sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to her closet. In the very back, hidden behind her janitor's uniforms and casual clothes, hung a garment bag she hadn't touched in 6 months. She unzipped it slowly. Inside was a black power suit, Armani, perfectly tailored, elegant and authoritative. The suit she'd worn to her father's funeral. The suit she'd planned to wear when she finally revealed herself as CEO. Aria ran her fingers over the fabric. By Monday, the humble janitor would be gone. And in her place would stand Aria Smith, daughter of Jonathan Smith, rightful CEO of Smithsland and Company. And George Morris? He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. She pulled out her laptop from under the bed, her real laptop, not the cheap one she kept in her apartment for show, and opened a folder labeled Documentation. Inside were 5 months of carefully organized files. George Morris misconduct evidence. 47 video files. 89 audio recordings. 156 written complaints, suppressed by HR. 23 instances of financial irregularities. 1 pattern of systematic abuse. Aria had been thorough. Every time George had screamed at an assistant until they cried. Every racist comment he'd made about employees. Every time he'd stolen credit for someone else's work. Every questionable expense report. Every complaint that had mysteriously disappeared before reaching the board. She documented everything. Because that's what her father had taught her. Power without evidence is just anger. But evidence with power? That's justice. Aria opened a new document and began typing. Agenda, Emergency Board Meeting Monday, December 23rd, 9 a.m. Leadership Transition and Misconduct Investigation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she outlined exactly what would happen Monday morning. The reveal. The evidence. The termination. Every detail planned with precision. By 2 a.m., she was finished. Aria closed her laptop and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The exhausted janitor stared back, dark circles under her eyes, calloused hands, shoulders bent from months of physical labor. But in 3 days, that woman would be gone forever. She whispered to her reflection, "You called me trash, George Morris. But I'm not trash. I never was. I'm the woman who signs your paychecks. Or rather. She smiled coldly, who used to. Across Manhattan, in his luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park, George Morris was still riding the high of the evening. He and Janet had just returned from the party, champagne still buzzing in their veins. Did you see their faces? George laughed, loosening his tie. When I called her trash. Priceless. Janet kicked off her Louboutins and collapsed onto their white leather sofa. You were amazing, darling. That's the George the First love, confident, powerful, not taking nonsense from anyone. George poured them both more champagne. Senior VP at 38, babe. And Marcus said the board is considering me for CEO next year. Can you imagine? I can more than imagine it, Janet purred, accepting the glass. I can see it. George Morris, Chief Executive Officer. And me, the CEO's wife. We'll be unstoppable. They clinked glasses, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. George's phone buzzed. A calendar notification. Board meeting, Monday 9 a.m., mandatory attendance. He frowned. That's weird. I don't remember this being scheduled. Janet glanced at his screen. Emergency board meeting? What's that about? George shrugged. Probably announcing my new responsibilities officially. Standard procedure after a promotion. Well, whatever it is, you'll handle it, Janet said confidently. You always do. George smiled and set his phone aside. You're right. Nothing to worry about. But somewhere deep in his gut, beneath the champagne and the arrogance and the celebration, something felt wrong. Like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air pressure changes and animals go quiet. He dismissed the feeling. He was George Morris, Senior Vice President of Smithsland and Company. He was untouchable. Or so he thought. I know what you're thinking right now. You're angry. You want to see George pay for what he just did. Well, buckle up, because karma is coming for him hard. But first, there's something about Aria you need to understand, something that makes this story even more satisfying. Hit that like button if you're Team Aria, and drop a comment telling me, what would you do if someone called you trash in front of everyone? Let's talk about it. 6 months earlier, Jonathan Smith's funeral. The rain had been relentless that day, drumming against the black umbrellas gathered around the grave. Aria Smith stood at the front, numb, watching as they lowered her father into the ground. Jonathan Smith, visionary, CEO father, reduced to a polished mahogany casket disappearing into the earth. After the service, David Farrows had taken her aside in his downtown office, the Manhattan skyline gray and weeping behind him. Your father left specific instructions, David had said, sliding a leather folder across his desk. Instructions that, well, they're unconventional. Aria had opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a will, but not the kind she'd expected. I don't understand, she'd said, reading the words again and again. He wants me to work as a janitor? For a full year? That's insane. David had leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. Your father believed that true leadership requires empathy. He wanted you to understand the company from the bottom up, to see who your employees really are when they think no one important is watching. But I've been groomed for this position my entire life, Aria had protested. MBA from Harvard, internships at Fortune 500 companies, executive training. All of which taught you how to run a business, David had interrupted quietly. But not how to lead people. There's a difference. Your father learned that lesson late in his career. He didn't want you to make the same mistake. Aria had stared at the document, at her father's signature at the bottom, and felt tears burning her eyes. Power without empathy is tyranny, she'd whispered, recognizing her father's favorite phrase. Exactly, David had said. Walk among them as one of them. Only then will you be ready to lead. And so, 6 months ago, Aria Smith had put away her designer suits, her expensive jewelry, her luxury lifestyle. She'd moved into a modest studio apartment in Queens. She'd applied for a janitorial position at Smith's Land & Company under the guise of needing night work to pay for her sick mother's medical bills. And she disappeared into the invisible world of the working class. Aria woke early, the morning light filtering through her small window. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with plans, strategies, contingencies. She made instant coffee, the cheap kind she'd grown accustomed to, and sat at her small desk, pulling out the hidden laptop David had given her 6 months ago. It had been concealed under a false bottom in her desk drawer, password protected with military-grade encryption. She opened the file labeled Project Justice. Inside were 5 months of meticulously organized evidence. Folder 1, Verbal Abuse. 47 video files of George screaming at employees. Audio, "You're worthless. How did someone as stupid as you even get hired?" Audio, "Maybe if you spent less time on maternity leave and more time working, you'd actually be useful." Audio, "People from your neighborhood don't usually amount to anything. Consider yourself lucky I haven't fired you yet." Folder 2, Credit Theft. 23 documented instances of George taking credit for subordinates' work. Email chains showing original ideas from junior staff. Meeting recordings where George presented those ideas as his own. Performance reviews where he rated those same employees as underperforming. Folder 3, Financial Irregularities. $127,000 in questionable expense reports over 12 months. Business dinners at restaurants that had no corporate reservation records. Client meetings in cities where Smith's Land had no clients. Company credit card charges at luxury retailers, casinos, vacation resorts. Folder 4, HR Complaints, suppressed. 156 formal complaints filed against George Morris. All mysteriously resolved or dismissed before reaching the board. Pattern of intimidation. Employees who complained were later fired for performance issues. Whistleblower testimonies, recorded with consent. Aria's jaw tightened as she reviewed the evidence. George Morris wasn't just cruel, he was systematic. Calculated. He'd built an empire of fear, and he'd done it with the company's resources and protection. But not anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Package delivered to your building lobby. M.W. Aria smiled. Marcus Williams, right on schedule. She went downstairs and retrieved a large manila envelope from her mailbox. Inside were USB drives, printed documents, and a handwritten note. Ms. Smith. Everything you requested. Security footage from the past 6 months, including last night's party, multiple angles. Also included, testimony statements from 12 employees willing to go on record. They trust you, even though they don't know who you are yet. They've seen you treat them with respect. Your father was right about you. See you Monday. Marcus Williams, head of night security. Aria's eyes stung with unexpected tears. She wasn't alone in this. Even in her disguise, even as just the janitor, she built alliances with people who valued integrity over hierarchy. She returned to her apartment and added Marcus's evidence to her files. The case against George Morris was now ironclad. Her phone rang. David Farrows. The board has been notified, he said without preamble. Emergency meeting, Monday at 9 a.m. mandatory attendance. I've listed the agenda as leadership transition and urgent company matters. George Morris has no idea what's coming. And the board members? Aria asked. How did they react? Confused, mostly. But they trust my judgment. I've served Smith's Land for 20 years. They know I wouldn't call an emergency session without cause. He paused. Aria, are you absolutely certain about this? Once you walk into that boardroom, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, she replied firmly. Then I'll see you Monday. And Aria? Your father would be incredibly proud. After hanging up, Aria walked to her closet and pulled out the garment bag she'd hidden in the back. Inside was the black Armani power suit, the one she'd worn to her father's funeral, the one she'd promised herself she'd wear again when she took her rightful place. She laid it carefully on her bed, then placed beside it her mother's pearl necklace, inherited, worth $50,000. Her grandmother's vintage Cartier watch, inherited, priceless. Black Louboutin heels, the real ones, not the knockoffs Janet wore. Her father's signet ring with the Smith's Land family crest. By Monday morning, the humble janitor would be gone, and in her place would stand Aria Smith, CEO leader, and the woman George Morris had fatally underestimated. George Morris woke late Saturday morning with a champagne headache and a satisfied smile. Last night had been perfect. The promotion, the engagement celebration, even that moment with the cleaning lady, everything had gone exactly as planned. He rolled over in bed. Janet was already awake, sitting by the window with her phone, typing furiously. "Morning, babe," he mumbled. "Who are you texting so early?" Janet's head snapped up, and for just a fraction of a second, George saw something flash across her face. Panic? Guilt? Before her practiced smile returned. "Oh, just coordinating with the wedding planner," she said smoothly, setting her phone face down on the nightstand. "She wants to discuss venue options for next June." George stretched. "June sounds perfect. By then, I might even be CEO." "I'm counting on it, darling," Janet replied, but her tone was strange. Distant. George's phone buzzed with the calendar reminder again. Board meeting, Monday 9 a.m. mandatory. "Still don't know what that's about," he muttered, scrolling through his emails. No agenda listed. Just urgent company matters. Janet stood abruptly. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Probably just formalities for your promotion. I'm going to shower." She disappeared into the bathroom, and George heard the water start. He reached for his phone to check stocks, but noticed Janet's phone still sitting on the nightstand. It lit up with an incoming text. George glanced at the bathroom door, water still running, then at the phone screen. "Unknown number, everything set for Monday? Once he's fully promoted, we move." George's stomach dropped. He picked up the phone. It wasn't locked. Janet had been typing when he spoke to her and hadn't locked it yet. He opened the message thread. "Unknown number, the party went perfectly. You made sure everyone saw him humiliate that cleaning girl, just like we discussed. Janet, he was vicious. Exactly what we need. The crueler he appears publicly, the easier the divorce settlement will be. Character witnesses will line up. Unknown number, smart. Once you're legally married and he's CEO, you take him for everything. 50% minimum. Maybe more if we can prove abuse. Janet, trust me, Trevor. By this time next year, we'll both be very, very rich." George's hands started shaking. Trevor. Trevor Howard, Janet's cousin. Or so she'd told him. The shower turned off. George quickly set the phone back down exactly where it had been, his heart hammering. Janet emerged moments later, wrapped in a towel, smiling. "What do you want for breakfast, honey?" George forced a smile, though his mind was screaming. "Whatever you want, babe. I'm not that hungry." "You okay?" Janet asked, studying him. "You look pale." "Just tired from last night," he lied. "I think I'll go for a run. Clear my head before Monday." "Good idea," Janet said, kissing his cheek. "See you later." George dressed quickly and left the penthouse, his mind racing. Janet was using him. The engagement, the support, the encouragement to be cruel to employees, it was all part of a plan. She was setting him up for a divorce settlement before they were even married. He walked the Manhattan streets for hours, paranoid, angry, confused. By the time he returned home that evening, he'd made a decision. he'd confront her. Eventually. But first, he needed to secure his position at Smithsland. Needed that CEO role locked down. Then he'd deal with Janet. He had no idea that by Monday morning, both his career and his relationship would be destroyed, just not in the way he imagined. Wait, did you catch that? Janet's been running a con this entire time. And George has no idea he's walking into a trap on two fronts. This story just got deeper. Before we continue, I need to know, do you think Janet actually loves George, or is she using him? Comment love or using below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is about to get insane. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because Monday's board meeting is going to be legendary. George woke with a knot in his stomach that champagne couldn't explain. He'd spent all of Saturday replaying that text message on Janet's phone. By this time next year, we'll both be very, very rich. He hadn't confronted her yet. Part of him hoped he'd misread, that there was some innocent explanation. But the other part, the part that had climbed the corporate ladder by recognizing threats, knew exactly what was happening. He was being played. Janet was already awake, dressed in expensive athleisure, pouring mimosas in their marble kitchen. Morning, honey. I made reservations at that brunch place you love. The one in Tribeca. George forced a smile. Sounds great. She handed him a glass, studying his face. You've been quiet since yesterday. Still thinking about that board meeting. Can't help it, George admitted, which was partially true. Emergency meetings are never good news. Janet set down her glass and wrapped her arms around his neck. George Morris, you are the youngest senior vice president in Smithsland history. The board loves you. This meeting is probably just them formally announcing your expanded responsibilities. Maybe even hinting at CEO succession. George wanted to believe her. The way she looked at him, the way she spoke with such confidence, it almost made him forget that text message. Almost. You're probably right, he said, kissing her forehead. But as he did, he noticed her phone on the counter, screen facing down. Always face down now. He hadn't noticed before, but she'd been doing that for months. His own phone rang, interrupting the moment. Unknown number. George answered. Hello. Mr. Morris. The voice was male, muffled, deliberate. You should know that Monday's board meeting has been moved up to an emergency session, called by the board chairman himself. George's blood ran cold. Chairman? David Farrows? Why wasn't I informed through proper channels? Consider this your courtesy warning. There was something ominous in the tone. Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Click. The line went dead. George stared at his phone, his hand trembling slightly. What the hell? Who was that? Janet asked, her voice sharp. I don't know. Someone warning me about Monday's meeting. Saying it was called by the chairman. George ran his hand through his hair. This doesn't make sense. David Farrows never calls emergency sessions. He's semi-retired, barely comes to the office anymore. Janet's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly. Probably just some intern playing a prank. You know how competitive your colleagues are. Someone's probably trying to psych you out. But George wasn't convinced. He immediately called his assistant, Sarah. She answered on the first ring. Mr. Morris. Sarah, I need you to find out what Monday's board meeting is about. The agenda, the reason, everything. There was a pause. Sir, I already tried yesterday after you asked. The agenda is completely sealed. Board members only. Even the senior executives don't know what it's about. George's stomach twisted. That's impossible. I'm senior VP. I have clearance for board matters. Not this one, sir. Sarah's voice was nervous. Whatever it is It's being kept very quiet. All I know is that attendance is mandatory for all board members, and you specifically were mentioned by name." "Me specifically?" "Yes, sir. David Farrow's office sent an email Friday night. It said, 'Ensure George Morris is present and on time.' That's all I know." George hung up and looked at Janet. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." Janet set down her mimosa, her practiced calm slipping slightly. "You're being paranoid, George. You just got promoted. They're probably just—" "Janet, emergency board meetings are never good." George snapped. "In my entire career, I've seen 3 emergency sessions. One was for a CEO firing. One was for a merger collapse. One was for a financial scandal. None of them were celebrations." Janet flinched at his tone, and for just a moment, George saw something in her eyes, not concern for him, but concern for herself. "I'm sure it's fine," she said quietly. "Let's just enjoy the rest of the weekend." But George couldn't shake the dread settling over him like a shroud. Aria sat across from David in his wood-paneled downtown office. The Manhattan skyline stretched behind him. Between them on the mahogany desk were documents that would change everything: corporate bylaws, shareholder agreements, CEO appointment papers. "Once you walk into that boardroom Monday," David said carefully, "there's no going back, Aria. You understand that?" "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. David slid the papers toward her. "Then sign here, here, and here." Aria picked up the Mont Blanc pen, her father's pen, the one David had saved for her, and signed her name with firm, clear strokes. Aria Elizabeth Smith. It felt like coming home. David witnessed her signature, then pulled a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. It was aged, yellowed slightly at the edges, and addressed in her father's familiar handwriting, "For Aria, to be opened before she takes her place." "He wrote this the week before he died," David said softly. "He made me promise to give it to you at the right moment." Aria's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She carefully opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Aria, if you're reading this, it means you've decided to reveal yourself. I'm proud of you, more than words can express. This journey was never about testing your patience, though I know it tested you deeply. It was about teaching you empathy. The business world forgets that every employee, from the CEO to the janitor, is a human being with dignity. Power without compassion creates tyrants. I've watched too many leaders lose their humanity chasing profit. I almost became one of them. Your mother saved me from that fate. She reminded me that the measure of a leader isn't how high they climb, but how many people they lift along the way. Don't become the kind of leader who sees employees as numbers on a spreadsheet. See them as people, with families, dreams, struggles, and worth. The people society ignores are often the ones who see the truth most clearly. Lead with your heart as much as your mind. Be fierce but fair. Be strong but kind. And never, ever forget what it felt like to be invisible. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. I know I am. Lead well, my daughter. With all my love, Dad." Tears streamed down Aria's face. She clutched the letter to her chest, feeling her father's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside her. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew someone would push me too far. He knew I'd have to reveal myself early." David nodded. Jonathan Smith was many things, but he was never naive. He understood human nature, both its cruelty and its capacity for change. Aria wiped her eyes and carefully folded the letter. "Then let's make sure his legacy continues. Let's show Smithsland what real leadership looks like." Janet Howard sat in a private booth at Balthazar, nervously stirring her martini. Across from her sat Trevor Howard, her real fiancé, her cousin by marriage, and the architect of the entire con. "This is taking too long," Trevor complained, checking his Rolex. "You said 6 months, tops. It's been 9. I know, Janet hissed. But the promotion just came through. His new salary kicks in next month. $800,000 base, plus bonuses. We need to wait until he's officially CEO. Then the settlement will be worth tens of millions. Trevor leaned forward. And you're sure he suspects nothing? Janet hesitated. He's been strange since Saturday. Paranoid about Monday's board meeting. What board meeting? I don't know. Some emergency session. He's freaking out about it, but I'm sure it's nothing. Trevor's eyes narrowed. Janet, what if something's wrong? What if they're investigating him for something? Then we cut our losses and run, Janet said coldly. But I don't think that's it. The man is untouchable at that company. He's their golden boy. He better be, Trevor warned. Because if this falls apart, we've wasted 2 years and you've had to actually sleep with that arrogant prick. Janet's smile was venomous. Believe me, I'm counting down the days until I never have to pretend again. They clinked glasses, neither of them realizing that by tomorrow afternoon, their entire scheme would be exposed, along with George's career. Aria laid out her outfit for tomorrow with ritualistic precision. The black Armani suit. Her mother's pearl necklace. The Louboutin heels she hadn't worn in 6 months. Her father's signet ring. She stood before her mirror and practiced her opening statement one more time. Good morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Aria Elizabeth Smith. I am the daughter of Jonathan Smith, founder and CEO of Smithsland and Company. For the past 5 months, I have been working among you, not as an executive, but as a janitor. Strong. Clear. Confident. Her phone rang. Marcus Williams. Everything ready for tomorrow? Aria asked. Yes, Ms. Smith. All security footage queued on the boardroom display. Audio recordings transferred to your tablet. Physical documents copied and distributed to board members. They've all been briefed on the situation. And George Morris has no idea? Marcus's voice carried a grim satisfaction. None whatsoever. He's going to walk in thinking it's just another meeting. By the time he walks out, he'll have nothing left. Aria smiled. Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. For everything. It's been an honor, Ms. Smith. Your father would be very proud. After hanging up, Aria took one last look at her reflection, the janitor's uniform hanging in her closet, the CEO's suit laid out on her bed. Tomorrow, Aria Smith would rise. And George Morris would fall. Oh my God, Janet's been running a con this entire time. Did you see that coming? Comment I knew it, or no way below. And here's a question. Do you think George deserves what's about to happen to him, even though he's being conned by Janet too? This is getting complicated, people. Make sure you're subscribed because Monday's board meeting is going to be explosive. We're about to reveal everything. Monday morning, 8:55 a.m., Smithsland and Company. Executive Building. George Morris adjusted his tie in the elevator mirror, trying to calm the anxiety churning in his gut. He'd barely slept. That anonymous phone call, the sealed agenda, the way his assistant's voice had trembled when she said his name was specifically mentioned, none of it sat right. Beside him, Janet squeezed his hand. You look perfect, darling. Whatever this is about, you'll handle it. George had decided not to confront her about the text messages. Not yet. First, he needed to secure his position at Smithsland. Then he'd deal with her betrayal. I still don't think you should come in with me, George said as they reached the executive floor. Nonsense, Janet replied firmly. We're a team now. Partners. I want to support you. Or make sure you don't lose the golden ticket, George thought bitterly, but he said nothing. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, solid mahogany, imposing, designed to intimidate. George had walked through those doors hundreds of times, always with confidence. Today felt different. He pushed them open. 8 board members were already seated around the long conference table. George recognized them all: Richard Blake, the CFO, Catherine Wu, the CEO, Michael Foster, the legal head, and 5 others, all senior executives, all people George had worked with for years. At the head of the table sat David Farrows, the company's chairman and Jonathan Smith's longtime attorney. His expression was unreadable: no smile, no greeting, just quiet observation. The atmosphere was wrong. Too formal. Too quiet. No coffee being poured, no small talk, no welcoming nods. Just silence and serious faces. George felt his confidence waver. "Good morning, everyone." Richard Blake looked up, his eyes flicking to Janet with obvious disapproval. "Good morning, George. I wasn't aware Ms. Howard would be joining us today." Janet smiled sweetly, her practiced socialite charm on full display. "I hope you don't mind. George and I are planning our future together, and I wanted to support him during such an important meeting." David Farrows spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. "Actually, Ms. Howard, this meeting is for board members only. I'll have to ask you to wait outside." Janet's smile faltered. "But—" "It's fine, babe," George interrupted, not wanting to appear weak in front of the board. "Wait in my office down the hall. This won't take long." Janet hesitated, her eyes darting between George and David Farrows. Something like panic flashed across her face before she masked it. "Of course. I'll be right outside if you need me." She left reluctantly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. George noticed she didn't walk toward his office. Instead, she lingered just outside the boardroom door, clearly trying to eavesdrop. David Farrows nodded to someone, and the heavy doors swung shut with a decisive click. George sat down, his hands clasped together to hide their slight tremor. "So, what's this emergency meeting about?" "My new responsibilities as senior VP." David Farrows' expression didn't change. "Mr. Morris, this meeting has been called to address several serious concerns about your conduct as vice president, and to introduce a significant change in company leadership." George's stomach dropped like a stone. "Concerns? What concerns?" Richard Blake leaned forward, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something cold and professional. "George, we've received multiple complaints about your treatment of staff over the past several months. Harassment. Verbal abuse. Creating a hostile work environment." "That's ridiculous," George said, his voice rising defensively. "Who's complaining? I demand to know who." "You'll know soon enough," David Farrows interrupted. "But first, I'd like to introduce someone." He nodded toward the door. The boardroom doors opened. All heads turned. A woman walked in, elegant black suit perfectly tailored, pearl necklace catching the light, designer heels clicking with confident precision. Her dark hair was styled professionally, swept back to reveal a face with subtle sophisticated makeup. She carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone born to power. George stared, confusion flickering across his face. Something about her was familiar, but he couldn't place. Then his eyes widened in shock. "Wait." He stammered. "Is that the janitor?" The woman walked directly to the empty chair at David Farrows' right hand, the seat traditionally reserved for the CEO. She sat down gracefully, crossed her legs, and met George's eyes with calm, unwavering intensity. George's mouth opened and closed. What is she doing here?" David Farrows stood, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "Mr. Morris, allow me to properly introduce Ms. Aria Elizabeth Smith, daughter of our late founder and CEO, Jonathan Smith, and as of this moment, the new Chief Executive Officer of Smithsland and Company." The words hit George like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Jonathan Smith never mentioned a daughter. There's no record." "Because he specifically requested anonymity for her," David explained. "Per his will, Ms. Smith has been working within this company for the past 5 months to understand its operations from every level, from the ground up. Aria spoke for the first time, and George flinched at her voice. It wasn't the meek, apologetic tone of the janitor he'd humiliated. It was clear, educated, powerful, the voice of someone who'd been taught to command rooms like this, including understanding how certain executives treat employees they consider beneath them, she said quietly. George's face drained of color. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. This is insane. She was a janitor. You can't just... Aria cut him off with a raised hand. Was a janitor, Mr. Morris. Past tense. And during those 5 months, I learned quite a lot about you. She nodded to someone standing by the door. Marcus Williams entered, no longer in his security guard uniform, but in a suit, carrying a laptop. George recognized him vaguely from the night shifts. Marcus connected the laptop to the boardroom's projection system. A large screen descended from the ceiling behind Aria. What is this? George demanded, his voice cracking slightly. What's going on? Aria's expression remained calm, but her eyes were ice. This, Mr. Morris, is accountability. The screen flickered to life. The first clip began playing. George's voice, loud, vicious, unmistakable, filled the room. You're worthless. How did someone as stupid as you even graduate high school? The video showed George leaning over his assistant Maria's desk, his face red with rage, his finger jabbing at her as she cowered and tried not to cry. The timestamp read, November 3rd, 3:47 p.m. George felt the blood drain from his face. That was, I didn't mean. The next clip played automatically. George mocking an intern's accent in front of a group of laughing colleagues. Maybe if you spent less time talking like that and more time learning English, you'd actually be useful. Then another. George taking credit for a presentation, while the junior analyst who actually created it sat silent in the corner. This strategy was my idea from the beginning. Some of you may have heard rumors otherwise, but let me be clear, this is my work. Another clip. George screaming at the elderly janitor Carlos. What are you, blind? Get out of my sight before I have you fired. People like you are replaceable. Each clip was time-stamped, dated, filmed from multiple angles. Security cameras George had never paid attention to. Recordings he didn't know existed. The compilation continued, 47 clips in total, each one more damning than the last. George's face cycled through colors. Pale, red, pale again. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Around the table, board members watched in stony silence. Some shook their heads. Others looked away in disgust. Catherine Wu's jaw was clenched so tight George could see the muscle jumping. When the video finally ended, the silence in the room was deafening. George's voice came out as a weak rasp. This is taken out of context. I was having bad days. The pressure of the job. Bad days. Aria's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Or your true character. She stood slowly and walked around the table toward him. George shrank back in his chair. Let me tell you what I witnessed, Mr. Morris, while I was just the janitor, Aria said, her voice steady and cold. I watched you humiliate Maria until she cried in the bathroom for an hour. I watched you mock Timothy Chen's accent while his family struggled to afford his tuition. I watched you steal credit from analysts who worked 70-hour weeks to support their families. And I watched you scream at Carlos, a 72-year-old man who has worked for this company for 30 years, because he missed cleaning one spot on one floor. George opened his mouth, but no words came out. Aria leaned down, her hands on the table, her face inches from his. And 3 nights ago, at your engagement party, you called me trash in front of 200 people. Do you remember that, Mr. Morris? George's hands trembled. The room seemed to be closing in around him. Do you remember? Aria repeated, her voice rising slightly. Yes, George whispered. Aria straightened, her expression hard as stone. Good. Because I want you to remember that moment for the rest of your life. I want you to remember that the woman you called trash is the woman who literally signs your paychecks. She paused, letting the words sink in. Or rather, she corrected coldly, who used to. It's happening. Aria just revealed herself and George is panicking. But wait, it gets even better. If you're enjoying watching George squirm, smash that like button right now. And comment karma, if you think he deserves this. We're only halfway through this board meeting and things are about to get so much worse for George. Stay tuned. Aria remained standing, her presence commanding the room. George sat frozen, his confident facade shattered like glass. But she wasn't finished. Let me be more specific about what I witnessed, Mr. Morris, Aria continued, her voice steady and precise. November 3rd, 10:47 p.m. I was cleaning the executive washroom when I overheard you speaking to Marcus Rodriguez, our night shift security guard. You told him, and I quote, "People like you should be grateful just to have jobs. People from the hood don't usually amount to anything." From the corner of the room, Marcus Williams nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. Several board members turned to look at him, their expressions darkening. November 17th, Aria continued, pulling up another document on the screen. You screamed at Sarah Chun, your pregnant assistant, in front of the entire marketing department. You called her useless, and said she should have thought about her career before getting knocked up. Sarah went on stress leave the next day. She hasn't returned. Richard Blake, the CFO, shook his head in visible disgust. Jesus Christ, George. December 8th, Aria said, her voice growing harder. You took the Johnson account presentation that Timothy Wu spent 3 weeks preparing, working nights and weekends to get it right, and you presented it to the board as your own work. When Timothy tried to speak up, you had him fired for underperformance the following week. Catherine Wu, the COO, slammed her hand on the table. Mr. Morris, is any of this true? George's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. There are always two sides to every story. That's not what I asked, Catherine snapped. Yes or no? Michael Foster, the legal head, leaned forward, his voice cold and prosecutorial. Mr. Morris, did you or did you not take credit for Timothy Wu's work? George looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally. He found none. Only cold stares and disappointed faces. He said nothing. Your silence speaks volumes, Michael said quietly. David Farrows cleared his throat. There's more. Aria, if you would. Aria pulled out a thick folder of financial documents and opened it deliberately. During my 5 months working here, I also took the opportunity to review the company's financials. After all, I am the majority shareholder. She projected a new spreadsheet onto the screen, rows and rows of highlighted expenses. Mr. Morris, can you explain these expense reports? George squinted at the screen, his face going from red to white in seconds. Over the past year, Aria continued, her voice clinical, you've charged $127,000 in business expenses to the company. Let's break that down, shall we? She clicked to the next slide. $45,000 for client dinners at restaurants that have no record of corporate reservations under your name or Smithslands. $30,000 for business travel to Miami, Las Vegas, and the Bahamas, locations where we have 0 clients and no business operations. And $52,000 in various entertainment expenses with no receipts, no documentation, and no legitimate business purpose. Richard Blake stood up slowly, his face purple with rage. George, this is embezzlement. Corporate fraud. You used company funds for personal expenses. I can explain. George shouted, panic finally breaking through his composure. Those were legitimate business expenses. I was networking, building relationships. With whom? Aria demanded. Show me one client, one contract, one piece of business that resulted from any of these expenses. George opened his mouth, but no words came. You can't, Aria said coldly. Because there aren't any. You were funding your lavish lifestyle with company money while drawing a senior executive salary of $650,000 per year. You were stealing from Smithsland while treating its employees like garbage. David Farrows stood, his voice grave and formal. Mr. Morris, the board has reviewed these findings extensively. Combined with the harassment complaints, the hostile work environment, and the financial misconduct, we have no choice but to wait. George suddenly shouted, desperation making his voice crack. You can't do this. I have connections. I'll sue this company into the ground. I'll call every reporter in New York. Aria walked directly up to George, looked him straight in the eye, and spoke in a voice so quiet and cold it silenced everyone in the room. You want to sue, Mr. Morris? Go ahead. Sue me. She paused, letting each word land like a hammer. I own 67% of this company. I am Smithsland and Company. And you. Another pause. The room held its breath. You're fired. George's eyes widened in shock. You can't. I just did. Aria's voice was steel. Security, please escort Mr. Morris out of the building immediately. His access cards, company phone, laptop, and all company property will be confiscated. He has 30 minutes to collect personal items from his office under supervision. Marcus Williams stepped forward, flanked by two other security guards George had never bothered to learn the names of. Let's go, Mr. Morris, Marcus said calmly. As the security guards approached, Aria added one final comment. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a knife. Oh, and Mr. Morris? You remember what you called me Friday night. George stood there, frozen, humiliated, his hands shaking. You called me trash. Right in front of everyone at your engagement party. She leaned just slightly closer, her eyes boring into his. I want you to remember something. I may have been dressed as a janitor, but I was never trash. I was the woman who literally signs your paychecks. Or rather. She smiled coldly. Who used to sign them? You'll never get another one from this company. Around the table, several board members suppressed smiles. Richard Blake actually nodded in approval. George's hands trembled, with rage, with humiliation, with the sudden crushing realization that his entire world had just collapsed. His promotion, his reputation, his future, all of it gone in 15 minutes. This isn't over, George hissed as security took his arms. You'll regret this. All of you will. Escort him out, Aria said calmly, turning her back on him. Just as security began leading George toward the door, there was a commotion in the hallway. The boardroom doors burst open. Janet Howard stormed in, her face flushed, her designer dress slightly disheveled from pushing past the assistant stationed outside. George? What's going on? Security won't let me. She stopped dead. Her eyes took in the scene, George being held by security guards, his face red and sweating. The board members staring at her with cold expressions. And at the head of the table in the CEO's chair, sat the woman from Friday night, the janitor, except now she wore a power suit and commanded the room like she owned it. Because she did. What is this? Janet stammered. Aria turned slowly, a slight smile playing at her lips. Ms. Howard. I was hoping you'd join us. Janet's confusion deepened. Who are you? What have you done to George? I'm the janitor you laughed at Friday night, Aria said pleasantly. The one you said cost less than your designer shoes. Remember? Janet's face went pale. But, you're CEO, Aria finished. Yes. Aria Smith, daughter of Jonathan Smith, founder of Smith's Land and Company. And I must say, Ms. Howard, I found your behavior at Friday's party absolutely fascinating. Janet's eyes darted between George and Aria, panic beginning to show. I don't understand. You will, Aria promised. Because while we were investigating Mr. Morris's conduct, we discovered some very interesting things about you as well. George, still held by security, looked at Janet with sudden suspicion. The text messages, the secret phone calls, Trevor Howard, it all came rushing back. Janet, George said slowly, his voice dangerous. What is she talking about? Janet's practiced composure cracked. George, I don't know what she's. Sit down, Ms. Howard, David Farrows said firmly. You're going to want to be sitting for this. Janet's knees seemed to give out. She sank into the nearest chair, her face the color of chalk. Aria nodded to Marcus, who pulled up a new file on the screen. And as the images began to load, Janet Howard realized that her perfectly constructed con was about to be exposed in front of everyone, including the man she'd spent 2 years deceiving. Yes. George just got destroyed. Comment fired, if you're celebrating right now. But hold on, we're not done yet. Janet's about to get exposed too, and what's coming next is even more satisfying. If you want to see Janet get exactly what she deserves, stay tuned. And hey, if this story is giving you life right now, share it with someone who needs to see that karma is real. Hit that subscribe button. Janet sat in the chair, her hands gripping the armrests, her face cycling through confusion, fear, and panic. George, what's happening? Why are they doing this? George, still held by security at the doorway, his face red with rage and humiliation, shouted back, Janet, get me a lawyer. Now. Get Thomas Berkeley on the phone. That won't be necessary, Aria said calmly. Janet whirled on her, desperation making her voice shrill. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? My family owns Howard Real Estate, half of downtown Manhattan. We have lawyers, connections, influence. Aria interrupted, her voice still calm, almost pleasant. Your family owns Howard Real Estate. Yes, I know. Quite successful, actually. I also know several other things about you, Ms. Howard. Something in Aria's tone made Janet freeze. David Farrows stood, pulling out another folder. Ms. Howard, as part of our due diligence when George announced his engagement 3 months ago, we conducted a routine background check on you. Janet's eyes darted to the folder, then back to David's face. A background check? For what? Standard procedure, David explained. All executive family members who might have access to company information, assets, or confidential matters undergo screening. It's company policy, has been for 20 years. Aria smiled slightly. And we found something interesting. Marcus pulled up new documents on the screen. The first image appeared, an official marriage certificate, State of New York seal clearly visible. Janet's eyes widened in horror. Her face went from flushed to deathly pale in seconds. Ms. Howard, Aria said, reading from the document projected on screen, or should I say Mrs. Trevor Howard, you're already married. From the doorway, George froze. Even the security guards holding him paused. What? Aria's voice remained steady, almost clinical. You've been married to Trevor Howard for 3 years. He's listed as your cousin by marriage in your social circle, but legally, he's your spouse. The marriage was registered in Manhattan on June 14th, 3 years ago. The screen changed to show wedding photos, professional shots from an intimate ceremony. Janet in a white dress, holding a bouquet of roses. Trevor in a tuxedo, his arm around her waist. The two of them kissing at an altar, surrounded by smiling witnesses. The timestamp was unmistakable, 3 years ago. That's not, Janet stammered, her practiced composure shattering. We got divorced. That marriage ended. No public record of divorce, David Farrows interjected, his lawyer's voice precise and unemotional. "We checked thoroughly. There's no divorce filing in New York State, or any other state where you might have established residency. Additionally, Trevor Howard is still listed as your spouse on your tax returns filed last April. Joint filing, in fact." Janet's face crumbled. "This is a mistake. This has to be." George's voice, from the doorway, was barely a whisper. "Janet, you're married? This whole time?" Janet turned to him, tears starting to stream down her carefully made-up face. "George, I can explain." "It gets worse," Aria said, pulling up another document. Bank statements appeared on screen, dozens of them, highlighted in yellow. "We also have records of financial transfers between you, George, and Trevor Howard over the past 6 months," Aria continued. "George, you've been transferring money to various accounts you believed were for wedding planning, honeymoon deposits, Janet's family emergency medical expenses." George stared at the screen, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Total amount transferred, $340,000, Aria said. "Those accounts are owned by Trevor Howard, your fiancé's husband." The room was silent except for Janet's quiet sobbing. Aria turned to George, her expression almost pitying. "Janet wasn't marrying you for love, George. She was conning you. The engagement was fake from the start. She was planning to marry you, wait for your promotion and salary increase to fully process, then divorce you and take half of everything in the settlement. Meanwhile, she and Trevor were already spending your money." George's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees right there in the doorway, security guards still holding his arms. "You." His voice cracked. "You were using me." Janet's sobs intensified. "George, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean. You were using me." George screamed, his voice raw with betrayal. Everything was a lie. The engagement, the love, the support, all of it. He tried to lunge toward her, but security held him back. He was yelling, crying, completely losing control in front of the board members who'd just fired him. 2 years, he sobbed. 2 years of my life. I introduced you to my family. I gave you money, gifts, access to everything. Because you were an arrogant bastard who deserved it." Janet suddenly shouted back. The crying stopped instantly. Her face hardened, transforming from victim to predator in seconds. "You think you're the victim here?" Janet spat, standing up. "You're a cruel, arrogant, abusive bastard who treats people like garbage. I watched you humiliate that girl Friday night, watched you call her trash, and I was disgusted." George stared at her in shock. "But you laughed. You called her trash too." "Because I had to play along with your sick game." Janet screamed. "You think I actually loved you? You think anyone could actually love someone like you? I tolerated you for the money, George. That's it. You were a means to an end. You manipulative bitch. You abusive asshole." They were screaming over each other now, hurling insults, all pretense of civility destroyed. Board members watched in stunned silence, witnessing the complete implosion of what had appeared to be Manhattan's newest power couple. Aria raised one hand. The room fell silent instantly. "Enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. "Both of you are beneath this company's dignity." She turned to Janet. "Ms. Howard, bigamy is a crime in New York State. Marriage fraud, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. You're facing multiple felony charges. I've already forwarded our findings to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. You'll be hearing from them shortly. I'd suggest you contact that family lawyer you mentioned." Janet's face went white. Aria turned to George. "And Mr. Morris, your termination is effective immediately. For the record, gross misconduct, harassment, embezzlement, and creating a hostile work environment. You have 24 hours to return all company property, laptop, phone, access cards, files, everything. Failure to comply will result in theft charges. Are we clear? George said nothing, his eyes hollow. I said, are we clear? Aria repeated. Yes, George whispered. Aria nodded to Marcus. Get them both out of my sight. Separately. I don't want them in the same elevator. Marcus and the other security guards moved into action. 2 guards took George toward the north elevator. 2 others escorted Janet toward the south. As they were led away, George and Janet continued screaming at each other across the executive floor. This is your fault. If you hadn't been so cruel to everyone. You were the one running a con. You're the criminal. I hope they destroy you. I hope you rot in prison. Their voices echoed down the marble hallways until finally, the elevator doors closed on each of them, cutting off the sound. The boardroom was silent. 8 board members sat in stunned disbelief, processing what they'd just witnessed. The company's rising star exposed as an abuser and embezzler. His fiancée revealed as a con artist and bigamist. 2 people's lives completely destroyed in under 30 minutes. Finally, Richard Blake, the CFO, spoke. Well, that was. He trailed off, unable to find words. Catherine Wu, the COO, finished for him, necessary. Long overdue, actually. Michael Foster, the legal head, looked at Aria with something like awe. Ms. Smith, your father would be incredibly proud. You handled that with remarkable composure. Aria sat down heavily in the CEO's chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the past 5 months. The humiliation, the invisibility, the patience, and now the confrontation. She was exhausted. Thank you, she said quietly. But there's still work to do. George Morris was a symptom, not the disease. We need to rebuild this company's culture from the ground up. New HR policies, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory respect training for all executives, and a complete audit of all expense reports from the past 5 years. The board members nodded in agreement. I'll also be promoting several employees who were unjustly overlooked or mistreated, Aria continued. Starting with Timothy Wu, whose work George stole. He'll be our new VP of Strategy. And Marcus Williams will be our new head of corporate security and employee advocacy. Agreed, Richard Blake said immediately. When do you want to start? Aria looked at the clock. It was barely 10 a.m. In 1 hour, she'd revealed herself, fired George Morris, exposed Janet Howard, and taken control of a billion-dollar company. We start now, she said. Oh, my God. Did you see that? George got fired and found out his fiancée was conning him. And Janet got exposed as a fraud. If you're sitting there with your jaw on the floor right now, type speechless in the comments. This is what happens when you treat people like trash. Karma comes for you twice. We're almost at the end, but the story's not over yet. Aria still has one more thing to do. Stay tuned. The company-wide announcement had gone out Monday evening, just as the business news outlets were publishing their stories. Hidden heiress takes control of Smith's land empire after working undercover as janitor. By Tuesday morning, every major news network was covering the story. Aria arrived at the executive parking garage at 7:30 a.m., parking in the spot that now bore her name, Aria Smith, CEO. The same spot where George Morris had parked just 8 days ago. As she walked toward the main entrance, she noticed something unusual. Employees were gathering outside, dozens of them, then over 100. They were waiting for her. As Aria approached, they began to applaud. The sound started quietly, then built into genuine enthusiastic clapping. Some employees held handmade signs, "Welcome CEO Smith. Thank you for caring. Finally, a leader who sees us." Aria's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Maria, the young assistant George had reduced to tears countless times, stepped forward. She was crying, but this time from joy. "Thank you," Maria said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for standing up for us. For seeing us. For making him pay." Aria pulled her into a hug. "You never deserved how he treated you. None of you did." Other employees approached. The janitor she'd worked alongside, the security guard she'd shared coffee with during late shifts, the assistants and interns who'd been invisible to executives like George. They weren't just welcoming a new CEO. They were welcoming someone who understood them. Aria had chosen the main conference hall deliberately, the same room where George's engagement party had taken place, where he'd called her trash in front of 200 people. Now, over 300 employees packed the space. Every department represented. Every level of the company, from entry-level to senior executives. Aria stood at the podium, her heart pounding. Public speaking had never frightened her, but this felt different. These people had seen her at her most vulnerable. They'd watched her clean their offices, empty their trash, endure humiliation. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "For those who don't know me yet, I'm Aria Smith. And yes, until last Friday, I was your janitor." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "My father, Jonathan Smith, asked me to work among you anonymously because he believed true leadership requires empathy. He was right." The room went quiet. "Over the past 5 months, I've seen this company from a perspective most CEOs never experience. I've seen who treats others with respect and who doesn't. I've seen who works hard in silence and who takes credit loudly. I've seen who lifts others up and who tears them down." Employees nodded, some wiping their eyes. "I've scrubbed your toilets. I've mopped your floors. I've emptied your trash bins at 2 a.m. while you worked late on presentations that your bosses would later claim as their own." She paused. "I've seen everything." You could hear a pin drop. "Starting today," Aria said firmly, "Smith's Land and Company will operate differently. Every employee, from entry-level to executive, will be treated with dignity. No exceptions. No more bullies in corner offices. No more harassment dismissed as pressure. No more abuse disguised as leadership." The crowd erupted in applause. Aria waited for silence, then continued, "Effective immediately, all support staff, janitors, security, administrative assistants, will receive a 20% raise. It's long overdue." More applause. "All executives will undergo mandatory respect and sensitivity training. We're implementing an anonymous reporting system for harassment. And we have a zero-tolerance policy for abuse of any kind. One strike. That's it." Standing ovation. "I'm also promoting several people who deserved recognition long ago. Timothy Wu, whose work George Morris stole, is now our Vice President of Strategy." Timothy, sitting in the front row, looked stunned. Colleagues around him shook his hand, patted his back. "And there's someone else I need to recognize," Aria said, her voice softening. "Marcus Williams, will you come up here?" Marcus, in his new suit, walked to the stage looking nervous. "Marcus," Aria said, turning to face him, "you protected me when you didn't have to. You gathered evidence of wrongdoing even though it could have cost you your job. You stood for what was right when it would have been easier to stay silent." She held out her hand. "Today, I'm promoting you to head of corporate security and employee advocacy." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He shook her hand, then pulled her into a brief, emotional hug. "Thank you, Ms. Smith. Your father would be so proud." The room gave them a standing ovation. The press was waiting. At least 20 reporters, cameras, microphones thrust forward as Aria stepped outside. "Ms. Smith, is it true you worked as a janitor? What happened to George Morris? Are the embezzlement allegations accurate? Will there be criminal charges?" Aria raised her hand, and the chaos quieted. "I'll make a brief statement, then I need to get back to work." She looked directly into the cameras. My father, Jonathan Smith, taught me that power means nothing without empathy. He asked me to walk among my employees as one of them before taking leadership. I lived his lesson. And yes, we've terminated employees for misconduct and fraud. George Morris is under investigation by the district attorney's office. This company will rebuild its culture from the foundation up. That's all. She turned and walked back inside, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. George sat on the floor of his studio apartment in Queens, a far cry from his Upper East Side penthouse. An eviction notice was taped to the door. Repo men had taken most of his furniture yesterday. His phone rang constantly, creditors, lawyers, former colleagues avoiding his calls. He'd blocked Janet's number after she tried to blame everything on him to the press. The TV played in the corner, the only thing the repo men hadn't taken yet. Former Smithsland Vice President George Morris is under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. Sources say he charged over $127,000 in personal expenses to the company and systematically harassed employees. His phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You called me trash. Look at you now." George screamed and threw the phone against the wall, where it shattered. He buried his face in his hands and cried. Janet Howard stood in handcuffs, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair now limp and unwashed. The arraignment for bigamy and fraud charges was being held in a packed courtroom. Trevor Howard sat in the witness section, his lawyer beside him. When Janet's eyes met his, he looked away. "Mr. Howard," the prosecutor said, "did you or did you not conspire with the defendant to defraud George Morris?" "She acted alone," Trevor said, his voice cold. "I had no knowledge of her plans." "You liar." Janet screamed from the defendant's table. "This was your plan. Your idea. You told me to." "Ms. Howard," the judge's gavel slammed down. "Control yourself or you'll be held in contempt." In the gallery, Janet's family sat in the back row. Her father's face was stone. When Janet tried to make eye contact, he shook his head slowly and looked away. "I have no daughter," he said quietly to his wife. Janet's perfect life, the society connections, the family money, the designer lifestyle, crumbled in real time. By pure coincidence, George and Janet exited the courthouse at the same time, him from his embezzlement hearing, her from her arraignment. They stood on the courthouse steps, 30 feet apart, and locked eyes. A long, bitter stare passed between them. Janet spoke first. "I hope you're happy." George's laugh was hollow. "Me? You destroyed everything." Janet's smile was venomous. "No, George. You destroyed yourself. I just helped." She walked away in one direction, escorted by her lawyer. George walked away in the other, alone. Both broke. Both disgraced. Both facing prison time. Both finally equal, not in power, but in their complete and utter fall. And that, my friends, is what happens when you treat people like trash. George lost everything: his job, his money, his reputation, his fiancée. Janet lost everything too: her con, her freedom, even her family. If you believe in karma, type "justice served" in the comments. We're almost at the end, but there's one more chapter. One more beautiful moment you need to see. Keep watching. 3 months later, late March. Spring had arrived in Manhattan, bringing with it new life and transformation. The same could be said for Smithsland and Company. Under Aria's leadership, the company had undergone a remarkable rebirth. Stock prices had climbed 30% in 3 months, a record growth rate. Employee satisfaction scores reached the highest in the company's 50-year history. Turnover dropped to nearly zero. Productivity soared. The media noticed. Forbes ran a cover story: the CEO who started as a janitor, Aria Smith's revolutionary leadership. Time magazine followed with Aria Smith, Leadership Through Empathy: How One Woman Changed Corporate Culture. But Aria hadn't let the attention change her. She still walked through every department daily, knowing employees by name. She ate lunch in the company cafeteria instead of the executive dining room. She personally thanked the janitors, security guards, and assistants, not because she had to, but because she understood their worth. Because she'd been one of them. The morning before the memorial event, Aria visited her father's grave alone. She placed fresh flowers, white lilies, his favorite, on the headstone. Jonathan Smith, founder, leader. Father, power without empathy is tyranny. "Hi, Dad," Aria said softly, sitting on the grass beside the grave. "I did it. I revealed myself early, but for the right reasons. You'd understand." She pulled out his letter, worn now from being read countless times, and read it again. "Power without compassion creates tyrants. Lead with your heart as much as your mind. The people society ignores are often the ones who see the truth most clearly." Tears rolled down Aria's cheeks. "I get it now. I really do. It was never about proving I could endure hardship. It was about learning to see people, really see them." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees above. For a moment, Aria felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. "I wish you could see the company now," she whispered. "I wish you could see what we're building. Everyone matters, Dad. Just like you taught me." She stayed for an hour, then returned to the city for the memorial event. Aria had deliberately chosen the same conference hall where George's engagement party had taken place. But tonight, the atmosphere was completely transformed. The room glowed with warm light and spring flowers. Over 300 employees and their families filled the space, not with champagne and hierarchy, but with genuine joy and community. Timothy Wu, now thriving as VP of Strategy, took the podium first. "6 months ago, I thought my career was over. Someone stole my work and had me fired. But Ms. Smith gave me a second chance. She showed me that good work doesn't go unnoticed, not when you have a leader who actually pays attention." Applause filled the room. Maria, the assistant George had tormented, spoke next. "I was about to quit. I'd lost all confidence. But Ms. Smith taught me that my worth isn't determined by how someone else treats me. It's determined by who I choose to be." More applause, some tears. Carlos, the elderly janitor George had screamed at, received a 30-year service award. He cried as Aria handed him the plaque and embraced him like family. Marcus Williams introduced a new scholarship program, full college tuition for underprivileged youth interested in corporate security and employee advocacy. Funded entirely by Smith's Land and Company. Then it was Aria's turn. She walked to the podium, her hands trembling slightly. The room fell silent. "1 year ago," she began, "my father left me an unusual inheritance. Not just a company, but a mission, to understand what true leadership means." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 6 months ago, I was scrubbing toilets in this very building. I was invisible to most of you. And on a cold December night, right here in this room, someone called me trash. The crowd murmured. They knew the story. It had become legend in the company. But that moment, as painful as it was, taught me the most important lesson of all. She looked around the room. Your title doesn't define your worth. Your character does. Heads nodded throughout the audience. George Morris thought he had power because of his position. But real power isn't what you can do to people, it's what you can do for them. My father knew that. That's why he asked me to work among you. Not to test me, but to teach me. And you, all of you who welcomed a janitor, who said good morning when others looked away, who treated me like a human being when I was invisible, you taught me what leadership really means. The room erupted in applause. So tonight, Aria continued, I'm announcing the Jonathan Smith Leadership Institute. A program that will send our employees, all employees at every level, to leadership training. Because everyone deserves the chance to grow. Standing ovation. And I'm establishing the Dignity Award, an annual recognition for the employee who best embodies respect, kindness, and integrity. She smiled. The first recipient is Marcus Williams. Marcus, surprised and emotional, made his way to the stage. They embraced as the room celebrated. As the event continued, Maria approached Aria with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Smith, thank you. You saved my career. Maybe my life. I was about to quit after George, after everything he did." Aria pulled her into a hug. "You deserved better, Maria. Everyone does." Maria pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Can I ask you something? When he called you trash in front of everyone, how did you not break down?" Aria smiled gently. "Because I knew who I was. And I knew that eventually, everyone else would know too." The party wound down. Families left, employees said their goodnights, the catering staff cleaned up. Aria stood alone in the conference hall, taking it all in. 6 months ago, she'd stood in this room wearing a janitor's uniform, her head bowed in humiliation as George Morris called her trash. Now she stood in an elegant dress, CEO of one of the most respected companies in America. She noticed a spray bottle someone had left behind, a janitor's cleaning supplies. Aria walked over, picked it up, and held it for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered to it, "for teaching me humility." She set it down gently on a table, then walked to the light switches. Before turning them off, she took one last look at the room. The Christmas decorations had been replaced with spring flowers. The atmosphere of cruelty and hierarchy had been replaced with warmth and community. Everything had changed. Aria turned off the lights and walked out, closing the door gently behind her. The camera lingered on the empty hall, bathed in moonlight streaming through the windows, before fading to black. Text appeared on screen. George Morris was convicted of embezzlement and corporate fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to repay $127,000 plus penalties. Janet Howard was convicted of bigamy, marriage fraud, and conspiracy. She served 18 months in prison. Trevor Howard testified against her in exchange for immunity. They divorced before her sentencing. Aria Smith continues to lead Smith's Land & Company, which is now ranked #1 in employee satisfaction and corporate social responsibility. The company has become a model for ethical leadership worldwide. By Aria's instruction, the company adopted a new motto, "Everyone matters." And they mean it. And that's the story. From janitor to CEO. From being called trash to becoming the boss. From humiliation to vindication. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves respect, if it showed you that karma is real, then please do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories like this every single day. Stories about justice, about dignity, about people getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment telling me, what was your favorite part? Was it when Aria revealed herself? When George got fired? When Janet got exposed? Let me know. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's been treated badly at work, someone who feels invisible, someone who needs hope, share this video with them. Tell them that everyone matters. That your title doesn't define your worth. That kindness is power. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in justice. And remember, treat everyone with respect, because you never know who's really signing the paychecks. I'll see you in the next story. Peace.